In a video from March the 1st this year, Angry Foreigner, a young Bosnian immigrant to Sweden who is very critical of the Swedish immigration policy, presented his solution to the problems that mass immigration has caused in Sweden over the past years. But first, what is the situation? Sweden has taken 970,000 migrants since 2010. 9.7% of the Swedish population arrived in the last 8 years. The immigration policy has led to ghettos, increasing violence and rapes, riots, a police force in crisis, dysfunctional hospitals, and dismantled welfare, according to Angry Foreigner. Of people in criminal gangs, 94.5% have at least one parent who is an immigrant. To gain in popularity, the politicians have told the people that Sweden has closed its borders, but in reality it's as bad as ever. In 2017, more than 135,000 migrants were given resident permits, which was almost as high as in 2015. It's the second highest in Swedish history and twice as many as in the other Nordic countries taken together. The city of Stockholm has even been paying for hotel rooms for newcoming migrants. Although being pushed by a feminist government, mass immigration has made Sweden increasingly dangerous, primarily to women and to the immigrants themselves. Latest news are grenade attacks, and not only the perpetrators, but most of the victims as well are in fact immigrants. Immigrants are hugely overrepresented in robbery and in rape. According to Sargon of Akkad, in a live stream with Angry Foreigner from April the 7th, criminals are more likely to emigrate, and it is also a cultural issue. The view that people have of women naturally affects their behavior. Muslim men view Western women as whores because they don't cover up. According to Angry Foreigner, Sharia police is patrolling the Swedish ghettos, scolding women for walking their dogs and not being covered up enough. When Muslim immigrants try to adjust to the Swedish society, other Muslim immigrants react aggressively, insulting them, calling them race traitors, and threatening them. In countries like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and the UK, most quote-unquote children who come are over 18. In Sweden it's more than 70%. There has been very little age testing because it is considered racist. Nevertheless, the Social Democrats secretly negotiated a deal with the Green Party to let all immigrants who had cheated about their age stay in Sweden. Child migration cost Sweden 27.6 billion crowns in 2016, which is more than was spent on the police, the prosecution, and the courts taken together. Between 2016 and 2020, the Swedish police will receive an additional 2 billion crowns. The Migration Board 100 billions. Elderly women who volunteer to take care of these quote-unquote children are in fact having sexual relationships with them, which is happening here in Germany as well. First-wave feminism demasculinized men, and now Sweden and other countries are importing sexists for sex, Angry Foreigner says. Young in Sweden is an organization for quote-unquote child immigrants to Sweden. One of the spokespersons raped a 14-year-old girl. The female leftist feminist migration activists defended him and sent threatening messages to the girl, accusing her of lying. Pressure groups are trying to get rape victims to shut up because it makes the migrants look bad. The Swedish immigration policy shows that the Swedish politicians' contempt for women. Sweden is importing rapists and refuses to deport them. In court cases, judges argue that African women, for example, are not less worth than Swedish women, and so the rapists are allowed to stay. Swedish politicians want to play the white savior to the Middle East and the rest of the world, but it is not possible, Sargon says. There are still circa 15 million people displaced from the conflict in Syria. Even if Sweden takes in 1 million refugees, there are still about 14 million people left. According to Angry Foreigner, Sweden spent 59 billion Swedish crowns on immigration in 2016, which is almost as much as the entire budget of the UNHCR for 70 million refugees worldwide, which consists of 62 billion Swedish crowns. Actually, the UNHCR only managed to raise half of that sum. Sweden has cut down on humanitarian aid internationally to take in refugees, although you get much more for the money in the conflict areas. One Red Cross food package, for example, costs circa 300 crowns, which is around 30 euros, and it will feed a whole family for a month in Syria. Instead of helping internationally as much as we can, we are importing young male gigolos for dried up elderly women at the taxpayer's expense, Angry Foreigner says. Mainly young men are coming. Who is left to fight the ISIS, Sargon asks. And there is the question of brain drain, of course. The president of Afghanistan wants Sweden to send people back to help rebuilding the country and fighting the Taliban, according to Angry Foreigner. Sweden is not the socialist utopia many in other countries think it is. Immigration forces Sweden to lower the wages. The working class is suffering as well as the middle class, because the middle class are the main taxpayers. But there are many other problems as well. Swedish healthcare has the longest waiting periods in Europe. Young cancer patients who could be cured are dying waiting for treatment. Between 2016 and 2017, the amount of people denied a personal assistant was doubled. The ones affected are mainly children. You have to wait for 6 months for a shrink, if you're lucky, Angry Foreigner says. This hits people with depression and mental disorders very hard. The left wants mass immigration because it provides them with no new voters. The Swedish Social Democrats' strongest support is in the no-go zones, the poorest areas in Sweden, and they are fully aware of this fact. Continued mass immigration keeps them in power. Furthermore, at least 50% of all Swedish politicians own real estate, and mass immigration has made the housing prices in Sweden skyrocket. Mass immigration benefits the elite only. Private banks are making a fortune on the housing bubble, and lawyers are profiting immensely from all asylum cases. According to Sargon, politicians want to mold the world after their ideals, regardless of how the world is. But the left has nothing to offer anymore. Capitalism has won against socialism. Instead of offering alternatives, because there are none, the left-wing parties are constantly blaming white men. Nowadays, about 70% of the Swedes think immigration is too high. But mainstream media has been trying to hide the truth from them for decades, Angry Foreigner says. Most Swedes don't live in ghettos or near refugee houses. They haven't had to experience the negative effects of these policies until fairly recently, and so they had no reason to question the journalists' official narrative until now. The problems have become so extreme that they are starting to leak into the people's everyday lives more and more. For years, Swedish media covered up the negative effects, refraining from reporting on immigrant-related crime, and lied about the financial consequences, claiming mass immigration to be highly advantageous to the country, which is not at all true. Dagens Nyheter, one of the biggest newspapers, wrote that mass immigration had brought Sweden 900 billion crowns in profit, and public service media like SVT Nyheter held that many of the refugees have a university education and consist of people like engineers, doctors and economists, stating, quote, "There is a massive import of knowledge," end quote. Thus, the Swedish people had no idea what they were voting for. Because of disappointment with the established parties, the National Party, the Sweden Democrats, has grown enormously over the past years, and today they are the third biggest party even among immigrants themselves. 10.3% of immigrant women sympathize with the Sweden Democrats. The Sweden Democrats predicted all of the problems: ghettos, increasing violence, rapes going up, riots, the crisis of the police force, the hospital crisis, and the reduction in welfare, years before they happened. Thanks to the media, many still think the Sweden Democrats want ethnic cleansing, which is not at all true. They don't want well-educated people deported. And now to angry foreigners' solution to all of this. 1. To close the borders for at least 10 years. 2. Accept 0 asylum applications. 3. Make it mandatory to deport all criminal immigrants, even those who have been given citizenship in the past 5 years, and revoke their citizenship. Giving them 500,000 crowns to return home is much cheaper than keeping them in Sweden, he says. 4. Revoke all welfare benefits for migrants. Access to welfare systems should only be available to Swedish citizens. 5. There should be no free welfare or healthcare checks for illegals. This would kill all incentives for people to come to Sweden illegally to begin with, because asylum applications take months to process. 6. Release the statistics on immigration and crime. Now, these are very interesting views. I completely agree with his suggestions. Angry Foreigner is a very important YouTuber, not just in Sweden but also internationally. He's, I guess, one of the biggest in Sweden and one of the very few who actually talk about the real problems with, for example, immigration and also other things. And I very strongly suggest you to check his channel if you haven't done that yet, and to subscribe to it. You're doing something good not just for the people of Sweden and for the immigrants actually living in Sweden, but also internationally.